When did the class clown go too far? In a high school classroom with a chill teacher, someone made a joke about another kid's dick being small. So, that kid exposed himself in front of the whole class to prove that it was large. He got suspended. Kid was always doing dumb stunts just to make people laugh. He got sick of climbing on / random things and jumping stairs one day and decided it'd be funny to smack into walls. His first few walls were fine as they were all concrete. There was a girl crying in the hallway and he figured he could make her laugh by making a funny face and tackling the glass door. He went through the door and needed stitches, leaving splatters of blood and broken glass on the way to the office. Junior year in high school in Algebra 2, the teacher was kind of a douche, so this one guy, let's call him Mike, would give him a hard time. This was a regular thing, and Mike would get kicked out of class for saying and doing some inappropriate stuff, but we all thought it was hilarious. One day, our teacher didn't show up to class. Word got around that his oldest son had died of a drug overdose, and he had to take some personal time off. He didn't show back up until a week later, and he looked really sullen and down. During class, Mike pulled out a can of Coca-Cola and started sipping it nonchalantly. Teacher had a strict no eating or drinking in class policy, and Mike was aware of this. He told Mike to throw it away and step outside. Mike, the absolute freaking savage, says, "Look, I know you don't like Coke, but I'm sure your son did." Nobody laughed. Just silence. Some people didn't get it. The ones who did were just too shocked to say anything like me. Mike threw his drink away and walked out of the classroom while the teacher just sort of haphazardly continued his lesson, although we could tell Mike's comment freaked him up. This one kid thought it would be funny to snort a line of that sour powder. This was no small line, mind you. I actually think he was rubbing it off the candy. Anyways, he does his line and instantly starts screaming. His nose was gushing blood and I honestly think he popped a blood vessel in his eye. Ran out of the room and later saw an ambulance come to the school. Don't do drugs. There was a class clown in my class and another one from the senior class at the time. They'd collaborated to throw toilet paper all over the schoolyard as a joke. I forget exactly what it was, but there was some kind of very important event going on that day and we were supposed to have a lot of visitors that afternoon. The principal was not amused. He said if they'd done that on any other day, he'd probably just let it go after making them clean it up. They got detention, and one of the teachers made them personally apologize to the elderly janitor who had to clean that shit up in the dark when it was freezing cold. Edit. The janitor found the mess when he'd gotten to school that morning while it was still dark around 6 AM or so. He started cleaning it up himself before anyone knew who did it. The office pulled the footage from the outdoor security cameras later that morning. Because it was such a small school, those dudes were identified in about 30 seconds. LMAO. Had a friend in high school, always would invite me to his parties. He was a popular guy on the wrestling team, and I was not. So he was always trying to hook me up with chicks. Anyways, went to a few of the parties and each were more crazy than the next. The final one he had was insane. Hundreds of people went upstairs to check on him because he'd had a lot to drink. Past the bathroom where some guys were popping Molly, then went to his room. As I was about to knock, he opens the door, looks me dead in the eyes, and says I just got freaked in the ass with the most pale and wild expression. Instantly I ask him if he's okay. A split second later he just flips his mind and expression to being the charismatic jock that he is. The other guy was another ladies man jock on the football team. He came up to me a few days later and laughed it off like it was a joke and was like, what happened at the party stays at the party. Lol, just clowning around I guess. Both are now happily married to women. I can only imagine how they initiated that. When I was in 3rd grade we were all doing our thing, coloring, reading, etc. The class clown was being really noisy and kept goofing off. We were all having fun and the class clown eventually sat down. It wasn't long before he was laying on the floor, foaming out of his mouth, shaking violently. We all laughed. It was a joke, right? Before long the teacher came rushing over to see the new joke the kid came up with. She immediately called 911 and he was rushed out of the room. He had a seizure while the whole class thought he was joking. He recovered and everything was fine. I just feel bad for the kid. My sophomore year of high school, it was an English class and there were 4 class clowns in the same class second semester of school, so it was shortly after I'd been switched from one teacher's class to the new one. During the first semester, there was a student a grade below us that had committed suicide, and the year before that my cousin had done the same. Teacher walked out of the classroom to take something to get printed or something, and left the only senior in the class in charge. Both she and I were close to the deceased freshman's family and had struggled with his death together. Not a minute after the teacher left, 2 of the clowns got up and went over to the windows, grabbed the pull string to the blinds, and used it as a noose to hang themselves. Some kids laughed, some kids told them to knock it off, a few just wanted to finish their worksheets, but I had to leave the classroom and I passed the teacher in the hall. She saw I was crying and asked what happened. I was trying to explain while sobbing when the senior came out after chewing the clowns a new one and explained to the teacher what had happened. She actually escorted everyone except the clowns out of the classroom so she wouldn't disturb the other classes around us with how much and how loudly she yelled at them. I knew a guy, high school student in the late 60s. He and his best friend were very close, but had also dated the same girl. My buddy dated this girl first, now the friend was dating her. No problems, but they both understood how this could be perceived as a potential friendship ender. They had a joke all planned out. The best friend grabbed some ketchup packets from a fast food restaurant. After lunch, he was sitting in class with the packets torn slightly, tucked unnoticeably in his hand. My buddy had the starter pistol from the track and field team. You see where this is going? My buddy ran into the classroom and shouted, "You can't steal my girl from me. If I can't have her, no one can." He fired the starter pistol, filled with blanks, not bullets, in the direction of his best friend. The friend, who had jumped up from his desk during the shouting, clutched his chest from the fake bullet wound, sending horrifying streaks of red ketchup flying all over his white t-shirt. He collapsed. The look of horror on the face of every student in the room, my buddy said, was amazing. He and his best friend both got detention. Sometimes I think about this story and I wonder what would happen if high school students tried this in a post-Columbine world. It's crazy how much times change in just a couple of generations. I had my moments of class clonery. The only one I really regret all these years later was from middle school. My science teacher was telling us his story about dealing with bullies. Back in his day, some punks were messing with him and his friends and he confronted them. At some point in the exchange, he said something like, "Come at me anytime, I'm not hard to find." I'm paraphrasing. For some reason my dumb brain thought not hard to find, easy to spot, so large that you can see him from anywhere. Looking for a laugh, I spoke up and said, "Why, were you fat?" There was some muffled laughter, but all I really remember was the teacher topping almost mid-sentence, staring daggers at me, face red as hell. He stopped his story, turned to his desk, and told us curtly to just work on homework. He barely said anything the rest of the class. I felt like absolute shit. It didn't register to me that, yeah, maybe he struggled with his weight as a kid and that was part of the bullying. I really didn't imagine he was a fat kid or anything. It was just a play on the easy to find mental image. Freak. I apologized as best I could at the end of class, but it was tense. At the end of the year he actually awarded me a Best Science Student Award or something like that. You know how they'll do a bunch of student awards for attendance and other shit. I think the fact that he did that means he forgave me, but I still feel like a massive heel every time I think about that. In my English class we all tried to be class clowns most of the time. However, the one time my friend took it too far was when at the end of the class, the teacher would go round picking up all the textbooks from each table while we stood waiting. When the teacher came round to collect his textbook, she lifted it up and my friend had unzipped his trousers and put his wanja through and hidden it under the book. She screamed and everyone else was so shocked at the sight of him stood there with his wanja flopped out on the table, but before anyone could say anything, he looks down and pretends to scream in fright as well, as if he did not know what he was looking at, as he lifts his arm up and proceeds to karate chop his own penis in front of my teacher and entire class. The lad got excluded for a day and got put in a new English class. I tripped a kid who was running for lunch back when I was in high school. He didn't get back up, thought he'd broken his leg. Ambulance called, kid taken away in full view of well over 1,000 plus. Got called out quite rightly for the cunt I'd been. And then, thankfully, comforted by the same kids when I became distraught at the though of what I'd done to this poor kid. After a rather sleepless and guilt-ridden night I found out that he had a dead leg and was fine. 30 years later, and I still freak out at what 14-year-old me did. I'm so sorry, Tristan. This is a true story, by the way. There was a class clown who makes pretty good jokes and is all around a respected person. They recently have been dropping roasts on people in their jokes, so people are starting to dislike them. The one thing that they said to ruin everyone's respect was making fun of the teacher. Usually people would find it funnier because it's somebody a general doesn't like to begin with, but this was way too far. The teacher was asked if she was a Cubs fan, and she said she is, because her dead uncle, who was the nicest person she ever met, was a diehard Cubs fan. The class clown then exclaimed he was such a diehard fan that he died hard. This was so bad that the teacher started crying and dismissed us early so she could get better. I went to a Christian school. We had an ethics class taught by a nun. Class clown began joking about religion, asking about cock of St. Peter, lewd comments about Virgin Mary, and other stuff I can't fully remember or too young to understand. Nun got so flustered, whole face turned red, and you can definitely see how angry and at same time embarrassed she was. She held out a rosary and asked the whole class to pray together for the class clown's soul and begged Jesus to lend us power to fight against the demon invading our class, all while the clown kept jumping around poking at the praying kids. She attempted exorcise the kid. She went to him and whispered something into the kid's ear. Tears began falling down his cheek and the nun accompanied him outside. I never saw him again. Officially, it was said he got transferred. There's this kid in class that is struggling financially in life. He's a kind kid though. We hang out sometimes, and we're kind of close. Let's call this kid Francis. One day, it was raining really hard, and Francis rarely goes to school when the weather is bad because he couldn't afford to commute in public transportation, and his family didn't own any vehicle. Plus, it was January. So, when he did get to school during that rainy day, I was surprised. He walked all the way here with an umbrella. The day went by, and it's almost over. The weather was still rainy, and we were about to go. We were chatting and laughing, and we failed to expect the holes all over Francis's umbrella. The class clown, let's call him Martin, laughed, pointing at Francis. Francis was a small 4'8" in height kid in 8th grade, and Martin would always bully him for that, which seems funny to him, but it isn't for the class and for Francis. But this time, what Martin did to Francis made Francis cry. He explained to me that the umbrella he had was something his family got for free during last Christmas. The fact that Francis is barely getting by and has a valuable item destroyed made me furious. But I didn't want to say anything because Francis told me not to tell the teacher. Although, next day, the teacher addressed an issue about someone's umbrella getting broken. Francis was totally silent, and Martin was looking away. The whole class speculated that Martin did it, and the teacher confirmed it. Martin was called for detention, asked if he could buy Francis a new umbrella, and had to do charity work for a week. Our funny teacher thought it was worthy to mention that the class clown got the lowest grade on an assignment in the class and teach us a lesson about what happens when you goof around all day long and not pay attention. What everyone thought was funny, since the kid was usually very upbeat and happy, resulted in him getting so embarrassed that he ridiculed our teacher for being morbidly obese, single at 60 years old, and bald. No one understood why he would say such hurtful words as a clapback. No one laughed, but he was chuckling and brushed it off. Our teacher quietly got up as it got dead quiet, took a deep breath, flung a desk across the room, and yelled his lungs out to get the hell out of his classroom. I swear, you could hear the building shake. Once he cooled down he apologized, but you could hear the hurt in his voice. Our class was given a worksheet and no one said a word. He was at his desk the entire rest of class trying not to break down, and at one point exited the room to talk to teacher next door who was concerned and heard the whole thing. They ended up changing the kid's schedule completely around mid-school year just to switch him to another teacher. No one found him funny anymore after that. My first year teaching, I had a nightmare student who was absolutely awful. He wanted to be a comedian, but every day was him shouting out profanity, harassing the girls, climbing desks, and so on. He got suspended for a week for pulling his pants down and flashing the girls. If I turned my back for 3 seconds, he'd be at my computer trying to search for porn. Most of the kids in the class couldn't stand him. He thought he was being funny, but he was acting like an animal. Like and subscribe for more Reddit videos.